Just as Haley Joel Osment saw dead people in M. Night Shyamalan's first big box office success, the director will see a whole lot of money with Glass. And we see a connection between offbeat superheroes and Shyamalan's shared universe. With the release of Glass, the director's trilogy that started with Unbreakable and continued with Split is headed toward a shocking conclusion. Will the director bring this story home with a classic twist ending? Or has the biggest twist been with us since the beginning? Join ScreenRant as we uncover whether James McAvoy's Split character was an Unbreakable this whole time. The idea for this trilogy of Shyamalan's began in the original three-act structure of Unbreakable. In that film from the year 2000, the writer-director planned to incorporate the character who eventually became Kevin Wendell Crumb. The character, afflicted with multiple personality disorder, was intended to be a villain who terrorized David Dunn in the movie's third act. Instead, Crumb's sadistic multiple personalities were put on the back burner, and his place was taken by the Orange Man. In Unbreakable, the Orange Man, or the man in the orange jumpsuit, has killed a family's father, and ultimately murdered the mother as well before David is able to enter the scene. David fights off the Orange Man and rescues the two children. While his identity remains a secret, his very existence saving the children and taking out the intruder makes him a hero to the local media. How would this scene have played out had we seen David face off against Kevin and his beast persona? The movie probably would have been a lot longer in order to flesh out Kevin Wendell Crumb's backstory and his abilities, and it likely would have detracted from David's story. So, M. Night Shyamalan wisely put Kevin's split personalities lower on the director's to-do list. But he didn't cut Crumb's character out entirely. In fact, he left us a trail of crumbs. And yeah, that pun was definitely intended. Those crumbs come in the form of the theory we're about to divulge to you. During the scene where David walks through Philadelphia's 30th Street station, the place where he happens upon the Orange Man, a strange encounter occurs. Within the arc of the movie, this sequence is similar to all those montages you'll see in other superhero origins. In the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, we see Peter experimenting with his wall-crawling abilities for the first time. We observe him sketch his suit, and we watch as he attempts to sling webs from building to building. In 2000's Unbreakable, the sequence is a little less full of wonder and more bathed in darkness, the way Shyamalan likes it. This is coming from the guy who can even make credit card commercials morose and foreboding. It's here in this situation that we follow Bruce Willis as David Dunn as our hero reaches out with his extrasensory perception and feels the inner voices around him. He's able to perceive which of the personalities mean to do good or ill when acting on their thoughts. And as we said, it's here he finds the man in the orange jumpsuit. While Kevin Wendell Crumb's storyline might have been cut to be expanded upon later, it's at another point in the film where David Dunn happens upon a young boy in the stadium while he's working security. Or rather, the boy happens upon him. In this scene, the boy is being dragged along by an older woman in a red coat who's holding his hand. We can assume she's the boy's mother. When they bump past David, he hears not one voice, but multiple. At the time we first saw this movie, when our young eyes could barely comprehend the future of this unofficially titled East Trail 177 trilogy, we might have assumed, hey, it just seems like there's some abuse going on with this kid. Somebody should give this household a wellness check, huh? It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but upon viewing it back with our wise old eyes, we gotta say, these voices could very well be the many voices of Kevin Wendell Crumb's dissociative identity disorder.
Now I see, that's clever.
And since M. Night knew that a sequel appearance from Kevin Wendell Crumb was an ultimate endgame for this storyline, why shouldn't he insert an Easter egg like this in the background of Dunn's origin story? After all, the year 2000 was the dawn of the new superhero era that we're in, with the start of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man and Bryan Singer X-Men franchises being the spark lighting the fire that brought us to the current cinematic superhero shared universe insanity that we all take for granted. And since Unbreakable's biggest twist was that it wasn't a moody and atmospheric thriller, but rather a moody and atmospheric and realistic superhero story, why shouldn't M. Night Shyamalan be aware of and adopt the kind of comic book conventions that he was nodding to within his superhero origin of a movie? Why shouldn't future villains be hidden and references embedded within the current story to build a world that we as an audience would want to keep coming back to? Besides, the appearance of Crumb as a boy fits within his character's backstory as we learn of it in Split. In the 17 years that passed between Unbreakable and Split, Crumb would have grown into a resentful and unstable man. He lives in Philadelphia, Sure, it's a city where M. Night Shyamalan likes to set most of his movies, but play along with us here. The movie's set in Philadelphia, and that's the same city where Unbreakable took place. It's around this city that the East Rail 177 train wreck happened, the event that set Unbreakable's storyline in motion. And it's around this same time that Crumb's father died. It was even later confirmed for us that Crumb's dad was off in the same tragic train crash that took the lives of all the other souls on board, save for Bruce Willis's character. And it was also later, during Split, that we learned Crumb was raised by his single mom in an abusive living arrangement. This situation led to a more brutal manifestation of Crumb's mental disorder in the form of superpowered personalities. So, with that in mind, between the time Split was released and Glass came out, Shyamalan was basically daring us not to connect the dots that have been staring us in the face this whole time. And to tie the events of Unbreakable even tighter to the events of Split, at the end of the latter movie, Bruce Willis watches the news report covering Crumb with a certain sense of familiarity. One could assume that David Dunn had become aware of other superpowered personalities in and around Philadelphia in the nearly 2 decades that have passed since Unbreakable. But why couldn't he have also held on to the encounter he shared with the boy in the stadium all those years ago? It shrieks of the internalized voices coming from the boy, and his mother in the stadium would likely have emotionally scarred whoever heard them. And since Dunn obviously felt the torment of those voices, he probably knows of Crumb and the threat he poses. Beyond the fact that the location, the blink and you'll miss it moment from Unbreakable, and Bruce Willis's cameo at the end of Split all seem to validate this theory, let's look at the dramatic irony that exists between Crumb, Dunn, and their connection to Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass. Price manufactured horrific crimes that afflicted masses of people in order to discover superpowered citizens. He wanted to reveal the presence of superheroes to the world at large, and it would be poetic if the tragedy, the East Rail 177 crash, led to the birth of not only David Dunn's superhero alter ego, but also the creation of Kevin Wendell Crumbs. By manufacturing a wreck that killed Crumb's father and rebirthed David Dunn, Mr. Glass was creating the world's ultimate hero and ultimate supervillain, and setting them up for a collision course that would likely reveal the existence of superpowered individuals to humanity. And yet, there was one member of humanity who was unaware of the superpowered connections between Kevin Wendell Crumb and Unbreakable. Surprisingly, that person was James McAvoy himself. Prior to filming, the actor read the script, and aside from a nod to Unbreakable that was buried within the screenplay's text, there weren't many references overtly written into the script. In fact, McAvoy may have helped Shyamalan make the Unbreakable and Split connection clearer. In an interview with Digital Spy, the actor related the following: "Then, a few weeks after that, I came clean with him. And I was like, dude, I did not get it at all. I think he realized that the little clue he was giving everybody just needed to be amped up, and he ended up coming up with a really cool scene at the end as well." But before we go deeper, here's a spoiler alert for those of you who haven't yet seen Glass. Don't worry, we'll give you a couple seconds. Everyone dies. Yep, at the end of this trilogy-capping installment, M. Night Shyamalan kills off the trio of main characters who anchor these 3 stories. And in doing so, he wipes the slate clean for a new dawn of humanity, one that's aware of superpowered beings and forced to come to terms with their existence. While this Shakespearean ending gives us a tragic conclusion, it ultimately swerves in a hopeful direction, which gives us all the opportunity to consider that the truth is much more helpful than the lies that higher powers might be feeding us. M. Night Shyamalan revealed in a recent interview with USA Today that the turn toward tragedy was intentional in order to wipe the slate clean of the old order and give us a hopeful look forward. When Kevin Crumb learns that his dad did not abandon his family and in fact died in the crash orchestrated by Glass, he turns on Elijah Price. But amidst all the chaos cutting through the multiple alliances, Crumb, Glass, and Dunn versus Dr. Ellie Staple and her anti-superhero crew, Crumb, Glass, and Dunn versus each other, Shyamalan intended for us to root for the 3 main characters in their own kind of unholy team-up. Shyamalan, in the USA Today interview, stated, "It's really hard to pick villains and heroes at the end of the movie. Obviously, some of the characters did some really bad things, but you really are rooting for all 3, which is highly unusual to feel that way." He ultimately wished there was a way out of killing all 3 leads in the film, but Shyamalan felt that the story needed to be led in this direction. And while USA Today ended up giving the film a negative review, like some other big critical names, they called it a letdown, despite a good amount of emotional richness and occasional glimpses of greatness. Shyamalan said that the audiences in the test screening agreed with the director's creative choices. They didn't seem to want the characters to meet their ends, but felt that the climax was a payoff for the sense of impending doom hanging over this movie's story. Besides, Glass, the film, ends with the security footage showing the existence of superpowered beings getting leaked to the world. With Elijah Price's life's work coming to fruition, the man who makes horrible decisions for his version of the greater good is vindicated, in a way. It means that all the bad things he'd done up to this point were all paid off for a positive conclusion. While this type of happy ending doesn't always happen in the real world, there's a connection that could be made. The world leaders pulling the strings who make bad choices with positive endgames in mind. It's a connection that M. Night Shyamalan was likely trying to make in his attempt at making a realistic superhero franchise. And since he's pulling the strings as a storyteller, killing off the characters he's created, we're sure there's a part of the character of Elijah Price that he identifies with. It's a finale that the director says he pulled from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where even though Jack Nicholson's character has ultimately lost, his mission lives on in the actions of the other characters around him. While Glass's body may finally have broken beyond repair, his plans and his spirit proved to be unbreakable. This whole conclusion was one that M. Night Shyamalan had reportedly planned since those early days at the dawn of our millennium, when he was working on that little movie called Unbreakable. And if he could plan out strokes that are as broad as the ending of Glass since the beginning of his East Rail 177 trilogy, then why couldn't he have stuck in a cameo of James McAvoy's Split character back in Unbreakable? Mr. Glass was always looking for a way to challenge David Dunn, so he could reach his status as the world's ultimate hero. It makes total sense that he would have been searching to create the ultimate villain to give Dunn a real challenge. But looking forward, from this theory, is Glass really the end? Why couldn't the tragic conclusion of this movie set up future films in the franchise? Is the death of Glass, Dunn, and Crumb a tragedy in the same vein as the East Rail crash that leads to the birth of new superheroes? And is there a moment in Glass that gives us a cameo of a new character whose existence we don't know about until some undisclosed sequel many years from now? Only time will tell. Do you think M. Night Shyamalan had this Easter egg planned the whole time, or is it just a convenient coincidence? Do you think there's way bigger surprises in store in the future? Let us know in the comments section below. And now that you've watched this video, hit that subscribe button to access more shocking content from ScreenRant. Catch you later.